This morning wasn't like any other. It was Veterans Day. A man walked past, older, slower, unnoticed. People saw his worn brown hat, his quiet steps, his aged skin, and thought they understood. But they didn't. They didn't know about the missions he never spoke of, the lives he saved that no one knew about, or the letters he kept writing to friends long gone. This wasn't just a routine visit to a gate. It was a powerful moment in history. Not because he asked for attention, but because true respect doesn't need words. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe honor never fades, like and subscribe. Because this deserves to be remembered. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the front gate of Fort Grantham, casting a soft golden glow on the guard booth. A breeze tugged at the flag overhead, but inside the booth the air felt colder, chilled by the kind of laughter that isn't kind. Elijah Monroe stepped forward. He was 82. His back was straight, his hands steady. The brim of his old brown hat shaded eyes that had seen more war than most on that base would ever read about. He wore clean khakis, polished shoes, and a neat shirt under a brown wool coat. He carried no weapon, just a cane in one hand and a thin sealed envelope in the other. "Good morning," he said calmly, handing over an ID card that had been tucked inside his wallet for decades. His voice was quiet, but clear. "I'm here for the memorial." The young lieutenant at the gate, Mason Rusk, 28, with a sharp haircut and a smug look, took the card with 2 fingers like it was something dirty. He glanced at it and laughed. "This thing expired in 1990, Rusk said, showing it to the other guards like it was a joke. "Sir, if you're still a sir, you can't just walk onto base with something that looks like it came from a cereal box." Elijah didn't react. He just stood there, calm, like he'd heard worse, and probably had. Rusk kept tapping the ID against the booth wall with a smirk. "We already get enough wannabes trying to act like war heroes." Inside the booth, Sergeant Kylie Baines leaned out, sipping coffee. "Let me guess," she said. "Another veteran with a story and a badge from the Reagan era?" The guards laughed. Elijah didn't say a word. He just reached out to take the card back, slow and steady. His hand brushed the edge of the envelope under his arm. Still, he said nothing. Rusk handed the ID back with a shrug. "Sorry, old-timer. No valid ID, no entry. Try the museum down the road." Elijah nodded once, took his card, and turned around. No anger, no argument. Just quiet dignity, walking back toward the lot. Where laughter had been, silence followed. Private Alio Torres leaned against the booth wall with his arms crossed. He hadn't said a word the whole time. He hadn't laughed either. He just watched, eyes narrowing under his cap as the old man slowly walked away. "That was hard to watch," he muttered. Lieutenant Rusk was still smiling. "Come on, Torres, you don't actually think that guy was real, do you? That ID looked like it went through Desert Storm in a dishwasher." Baines snorted into her coffee. "He had that wise old man vibe. Probably tells kids he taught Chuck Norris how to fight." More laughter. A few more guards came over, hearing the jokes. Corporal Lenny Shaw said, "Honestly, I thought he was here to fix the plumbing. Who shows up in khakis and a second-hand jacket trying to get on base?" Someone else added, "Maybe he's writing a book, How I Faked My Way into a Military Memorial." And just like that, the jokes kept coming. The group fed off each other, laughing louder with every new jab. One of them mimicked Elijah's slow walk, leaning on an invisible cane, pretending to be confused. Even Rusk chuckled at that, shaking his head. But Torres didn't laugh. He watched the old man reach the edge of the lot, sit on a bench under a quiet tree, and gently take off his hat, placing it on his lap with care. He never looked back. Something about it felt off. Or maybe it felt too right, too steady, too quiet to be fake. Torres had grown up on stories. His abuelo had fought in Korea. Never talked about it, unless someone pushed. And even then, his voice would change. When he finally looked down, slower now, almost haunted, Elijah Monroe reminded Torres of that same quiet weight his grandfather carried. Some men hold on to things their whole lives and never ask anyone to notice. And yet, they'd laughed at him. "That doesn't feel right," Torres said softly, mostly to himself. "You say something?" Rusk asked, tossing the old ID into a plastic bag marked Invalid Credentials. Torres didn't reply. He stepped outside and looked toward the old man sitting beneath the tree. The sunlight glinted off Elijah's cane. There, carved into the polished wood, was the Marine Corps emblem. It wasn't for show, and it definitely wasn't something you could buy. It was real. Torres pulled out his phone. His cousin Jordan worked in civilian logistics in Arlington. Maybe he could quietly check something. Inside the booth, the laughter continued. But out here, under the rising sun, Elijah Monroe sat still and silent, calm, untouched. But something was shifting, and Torres could feel it deep in his gut. This wasn't over, not even close. Deborah Lane was stirring a pot of grits in the mess hall when the news started floating in, quiet, almost casual, passed between two guards grabbing early coffee. "You should have seen the guy. Walked up like he owned the place," one said, and Rusk nearly choked on his own laugh. She didn't respond right away, just kept stirring. "ID was older than my mom, swear to God," another added. "Had a cane and some weird envelope, like spy movie stuff." Deborah's spoon slowed. "Rusk told him to go try a museum," one guard continued. "The guy just turned around and left, didn't say a word." Now she turned. "What did he look like?" she asked, voice calm. One guard shrugged. "Old, black, maybe in his 80s, brown hat, wore it like it mattered." Deborah's chest tightened. "Brown hat?" "Yeah, one of those soft felt ones, not a ball cap." She set the spoon down, slowly wiped her hands on her apron. "Was he quiet?" The guards exchanged glances, then nodded. "Didn't talk much, didn't argue, just left." "Why?" one asked. Deborah let out a slow breath. Her voice turned distant. "I think I saw him once before, a long time ago, back when this place still smelled like gunpowder and broken promises." They stared at her. "It was 1982, she went on. "Explosion at the fuel depot. Everyone ran except one man. Thin, older even then, walked straight into the smoke, carried out 3 men like they were nothing. Never said a word, just left." "You think that was him?" "I never got his name," she whispered. "But I never forgot that face, or that hat." The room went quiet. Back at the checkpoint, Alio Torres sat in the break room, phone to his ear. "Jordan, it's me. Yeah, I need a favor. Can you run a name through personnel archives?" Quietly. He gave the name slowly. "Elijah Monroe. Probably served in Vietnam, maybe earlier. Marine Corps, might have held a high rank. Anything you can find." Torres hung up and looked out the window. Elijah was still there, still on the bench, still unmoving, like the world could fall apart around him and he'd just wait it out. Torres whispered the words his father once told him. "Real warriors don't ask for respect. They carry it." At that moment, a young communications officer, overhearing part of Deborah's story, quietly snapped a photo of Elijah through the glass. He uploaded it to the base's internal forum with a simple caption. "Does anyone recognize this vet? Turned away at the gate. Mess hall says he saved lives in '82. The post wasn't loud, but the image, a proud old man under a tree, hat in his lap, eyes forward, said everything. And within minutes, the silence began to crack. The security office at Fort Grantham was never truly quiet. Between radio calls, footsteps, and rotating guards, silence didn't last long. But when the phone rang that morning, sharp, deliberate, and unmistakably official, the room stilled before anyone even answered. Private Alio Torres was closest. He saw the caller ID immediately. Pentagon. Secure line. He stood tall and answered, voice steady. "Private Torres speaking." The voice on the other end was clear, firm, and commanding. "This is Colonel Renee Langston. I need to speak with the officer in charge of the main checkpoint. Now. Put me on speaker." Torres didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, quieting the room. "Lieutenant Rusk," he called. "There's a call from D.C. They want you on speaker." Lieutenant Rusk had just returned from the locker room, still buzzing from his retelling of how he'd handled the veteran. He strolled in with a smirk and rolled his eyes as he stepped up to the desk. "This is Lieutenant Mason Rusk," he said with a smug grin. "How can I—" "Put me on speaker." The voice sliced through the room like steel. Rusk fumbled for the button. Now on speaker, the voice filled the room with an icy calm. "Lieutenant Rusk, this is Colonel Renee Langston, Special Operations Legacy Office. As of this moment, you are to treat the man you turned away, Sergeant Major Elijah Monroe, with full honors. You are speaking of a man whose service predates your birth. His record includes operations still classified across 4 branches." Rusk went pale. "Sir, ma'am, I wasn't aware." "No, you weren't," Langston snapped. "You saw an old man with an outdated ID and made a joke of it. That old man led Operation Falcon Wing in 1972. He personally commanded the rescue of 27 POWs in North Vietnam without a single casualty. His clearance under Directive 117B is still valid. Indefinitely." The silence that followed was like a flag dropping. Sergeant Baines stammered, "Wait, that Elijah Monroe?" "Yes," Langston said flatly, "and you humiliated him at your gate." Just then, headlights swept across the booth. A black military SUV pulled up, its frame clean and authoritative. 3 high-ranking officers in dress uniforms stepped out. The lead figure walked with quiet force, Colonel Isaac Greer. "Where is Sergeant Major Monroe?" he asked, his voice like thunder that didn't need to shout. Rusk, suddenly dry-mouthed, pointed toward the bench by the tree. Colonel Greer gave a single nod. "Stand down. Prepare for honors protocol." He didn't wait for a reply. He marched directly toward the tree. Inside the booth, no one moved. Rusk's hands trembled. Torres glanced around, then murmured, "What did I tell you?" Outside, Elijah Monroe rose slowly. Colonel Greer saluted, sharp and deliberate. Elijah returned it with calm precision, the way only someone who'd done it 1,000 times could. But this time, it meant something different. This time, they finally saw him. It began with whispers. By the time Colonel Greer walked Elijah Monroe back toward the gate, the whispers had become orders. Urgent calls flew through Fort Grantham like sparks in dry brush. "Prepare the corridor. Full honors. Incoming. Sergeant Major Elijah Monroe. In 15 minutes, the base transformed. Uniforms were pressed, medals fastened, helmets adjusted. An honor guard lined the main road, from the gate to the memorial courtyard. And at the center of it all, Elijah walked slowly. His cane was tucked beneath one arm. His brown hat shaded his eyes. In one hand, he still held the sealed envelope. Colonel Greer walked beside him, 2 other officers trailing behind. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The sound of boots snapping to attention was language enough. At the gate, Lieutenant Rusk stood at full attention, jaw locked, eyes forward. Sergeant Baines was beside him, face unreadable. Neither dared say a word. Elijah passed without a glance. Colonel Greer paused. He turned to the stunned security team. "For your information," he said, "that ID card you mocked contains a passive transmitter. It activates once a year, on Veterans Day. That's how we know he's still alive." Rusk blinked. We track him?" Greer's voice sharpened. "We honor him. Quietly. Because Sergeant Major Monroe never asked for recognition, only that we remember the ones who didn't come home. He turned back, and the procession continued. From the booth, Torres watched, heart racing. The line of saluting soldiers seemed to stretch forever, their uniforms catching the morning light. By the time Elijah reached the memorial courtyard, the crowd had doubled. Officers, recruits, kitchen staff, mechanics. Everyone stood silent, hands at their sides, salutes held firm. No one asked questions now. Colonel Greer gestured toward the polished black wall. Elijah stepped forward alone. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the envelope, and gently laid it at the wall's base. Then he knelt, not from pain, but reverence. A hush settled over the crowd. His hand rested on the carved names of 18 soldiers, names no one else had spoken in decades, names only he remembered. He didn't speak, he didn't cry. But the silence around him felt sacred. When Elijah finally stood, turning back toward the crowd, a single voice called out from the ranks, "Sergeant Major on deck!" In perfect unison, hundreds of boots snapped together, hundreds of hands lifted in salute, not out of rank, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, respect, long overdue. The courtyard held its breath. Elijah Monroe faced the wall. The stone was smooth, the names etched deep, names most had forgotten, names he never could. Colonel Greer stepped back, giving the old warrior space. Elijah's hand hovered, fingers tracing the letters gently, like memory in motion. Every name belonged to someone who had followed him through fire, mud, and darkness. Some had called him Sergeant, some just called him Monroe, but all of them had called him leader. "I didn't come here for applause," Elijah finally said. His voice was low, steady, cutting through the silence like morning light. "I came to deliver these." Elijah placed the envelope gently at the base of the wall. He didn't turn around as he continued. "I've written letters every year, one for each of them. I told their families what kind of men they were, what they did, what they gave." The crowd behind him stood frozen in reverent silence. "I never mailed them," he added quietly. "Didn't think anyone would care." Colonel Greer stepped forward. "They did, Sergeant Major." Elijah looked up, startled. Greer nodded. "We've been retrieving your letters every Veterans Day. The names and addresses on those envelopes, they weren't just symbols. We delivered everyone." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Elijah blinked slowly. For the first time that day, his composure wavered. "You delivered them?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. "Yes, sir. Every year. Some families have kept every letter. Some read them at dinner, some framed them." A hush deeper than silence settled across the courtyard. Elijah closed his eyes. When he opened them, they shimmered, not with weakness, but with the weight of being finally, truly understood. At the back, Lieutenant Rusk stood stiff, his eyes locked on Elijah. When the old man turned, their gazes met. "I'm sorry," Rusk said quietly. Elijah held his gaze, then gave a single solemn nod. "You saw a man, but you didn't see the weight he carried." Rusk swallowed hard. "I see it now." The crowd slowly parted to let Elijah pass. He didn't need an escort. He walked tall. And as he passed the line of recruits and officers, one truth echoed louder than words. The wall bore the names of the fallen, but behind one name, a man still stood. Later that afternoon, Fort Grantham's base commander called an impromptu gathering in the main hall. Over 200 personnel, many fresh from basic, filled the space. The air was hushed, reverent. Colonel Greer took the podium. "Today," he said, "you didn't just meet history, you stood in its presence." Then he stepped aside. Elijah Monroe walked slowly to the front, his brown hat in hand. The room fell completely silent. He looked out at the young faces, some curious, some ashamed, all listening. "I'm no hero," Elijah began, "just a man who kept his promises." He paused, eyes scanning the back of the room, where Lieutenant Rusk stood straight as a rod. "You've been taught that honor comes with rank, with ribbons, with recognition," Elijah said. "But real honor, it shows up when no one's watching. It's in how you treat a stranger, even one who looks like he doesn't belong." He stepped back. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. Afterward, Rusk approached slowly. "Sergeant Major, I failed you." Elijah turned to face him. "Number, you failed yourself." He looked the young officer in the eye. "But now you have a choice. Change how you lead, or keep pretending the mirror doesn't matter." Rusk stood straighter. "I'll change, sir." Elijah nodded, not accepting praise or apology, only truth. That evening, a new plaque was installed at the base's main gate, the Elijah Monroe Gate, for the quiet valor we almost didn't see, and below it, in smaller text, "Honor endures, even when credentials expire." Fort Grantham had turned a page, not because of who Elijah was, but because they finally understood what he stood for. The following year, as fog rolled over the quiet town of Briar Ridge, a black military SUV pulled into a modest gravel driveway. No one knocked. They didn't have to. Elijah Monroe stood at the front door, brown hat in hand, as if he'd been waiting, just like he always did on Veterans Day. A young officer stepped out and saluted. "Sergeant Major," he said, "permission to accompany you?" Elijah gave a faint smile. "Permission granted." And so the tradition continued. Every year the vehicle came. Every year Elijah returned to Fort Grantham, not for parades, not for speeches, but to kneel at the wall, to whisper the names, to leave another envelope. He never asked for fanfare, but the base gave it anyway. An honor corridor formed with every visit, not out of duty, out of gratitude. When he passed quietly in his sleep at age 89, there was no headline, just a sealed envelope on his desk, labeled, "For the ones I couldn't save." Inside, one final letter, greater than. Honor does not fade, it only needs one person to remember. Justice may arrive late, but it is never absent. Don't stop doing right, even when no one is watching. At Fort Grantham, the Elijah Monroe Gate still stands, and every new recruit is told the story, not of a man who demanded respect, but of one who carried it even when forgotten. Because some warriors leave behind medals, others leave behind legacies written in silence, and some, like Elijah, leave behind a message that echoes beyond stone. You don't need a title to stand with dignity. You just need the courage to never let it go.